So this is our first Algebra 2 learning objective for Unit 2. We're talking about functions. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what is a function and does something actually make a function. All right, so a lot of times in the real world, we need to relate two different things together. So for example, in class, as you're doing all your work, I need to keep track of each student and then their grade in the class. There's the relationship between student and grade. All right, and then this relationship is called a relation in math, and it can be in math class, it'll generally be between kind of some numbers and some other numbers, but you could do it with names and grades. You could do it with types of fruit and calories or something. So it doesn't have to be numbers, it's just any type of relation. All right, but there is a special type of relation that we're going to talk about, and that's known as a function. So a function, it's still just relating two different pieces of information. Again, generally in math, it's going to be kind of numbers to numbers. But for a function, it's important because you put in one thing into your function and you get out one thing. So the fact that you only get out one answer when you put in one thing is what makes a function special over a relation. For instance, if we're talking about like the grade example, you could put in your name and you get out multiple different grades. You could get your grades in math, you get your grade in English, and you get your grade in history or whatever. All right, so you could put in your one name and get out multiple different grades. This would not be a function because you're getting out three different things. But if you put in your name and only got out your math grade, all right, that would be a function because you're just getting out one thing. All right, the thing we're putting into our function is called the input. And most of the time, for what we're dealing with in class, it's going to be your x value. And the thing we're getting out of our function is our output, and that's generally our y value. All right, so if you're trying to think about a function, the thing I like to think about with a function is a vending machine. Vending machine has multiple different buttons, so that's my input, is whatever button I'm pushing. And the output is the drink that I'm going to get out of the vending machine. And I should only get one drink out. If I push the Coca-Cola button, I should only get one Coca-Cola out. And it should be the same thing every single time. So the function is kind of a rule. It shouldn't be kind of a random thing. When I put this one thing in, I get whatever I should get out that one thing out. All right, so the first thing we want to do is be able to identify if something is actually a function. All right, so keep in mind that our inputs are x's and our outputs are y's. All right, so we want to say if I put in one thing, do I only get out one thing? So in this top one, I put in 1 and I get out -1. That's fine. I put in 2 and I get out 2. That's also fine. I just keep getting out one thing. I put in 3, get out -3, and so on. All right, so this one seems like a function. This one is yes. Because every single value I put in for x, I just get out one value for y. All right, the next one starts out good. I put in 1, I get out 1. That's fine. I put in 2, I get out 2. I put in 1, and I get out 3, and that seems like it's fine, but we already put in 1 over here, and we got out 1. And here we're putting in 1 again and getting out 3. So we have 1, and it could give me 1 sometimes or give me 3 other times. And that's exactly what we don't want to happen in a function. I don't want to have these two different, the same input is 1, but I'm getting out 2 different outputs. This one is not a function. I have the same input, but 2 different outputs that go with it. And let's look at the last one. All right, starts off good again. 1 and 1, that's fine. 2 and 2, that's also fine. 2 goes to 3 goes to 1. And you might be saying now, well, here I have a 1 and a 1, so that's not good. But again, the important thing is I put in one input and get out one output associated with it. So it's fine if the outputs repeat. I can have 1 pop up multiple times. The important thing is that 1 only goes to 1, 3 only goes to 1. There's not another case where like 3 also goes to 2. That's what would make this not a function. I guess 3 would be going to 1 and 3 would be going to 2. But in this case, every single input, they're all different inputs and they're going down to exactly one output. All right, some of them have the same output, but they're only 1 per input. All right, so that's what does make this a function. All right, so keep that in mind and try this one on your own. All right, do you think this represents a function? and really had a 50-50 shot for this one, but the final answer is no, this is not a function, and I put a square around the reason why. All right, we have 2. 2 is related to 2. All right, I put in 2 and I get out tail, but also 2 is related to 1. I put in 2 and get out 1. And this is exactly what we don't want to happen in a function where we have these two different outputs coming from this one input. So the fact that these numbers are repeated on the top with different numbers on the bottom is what makes this one not a function. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing in a graph. A graph is really just a table, but in a picture format. All right, so every single point on a graph like this point is x comma y. And remember that x is our input and y is our output. All right, so how can we figure out if we have any of these bad situations happen? So if we think about the tables, we had something like this. That was bad for the table where I had the same x value but different y value. So I have to make sure that at any point where I have an x value, so let's say I pick x equals 2, for instance, do I have multiple y values represented? Well, I can kind of look at the vertical line. All right, this is all the places where x is 2, but I just have that one point at 2 comma 0. So when I input 2, I only get out 0. I could do it at -1. And when I put in -1, the only place on my graph is there at -1, 3, which means when I put in -1, I only get out 3. And you can see as I look through, let's say like -2, I'm just making all these vertical lines at these x values and making sure I only get one y value at those. All right. So this one, you can see all these points I've chosen so far. Really had to pick every single point, which we're not going to do, but you can kind of get an intuition that this one is going to be a function. All right, what about the next one? All right. Let's do the same thing. Let's go to 2. All right, so 2 is here. And let's check what y values are associated with. So again, I look at this vertical line. This is everywhere where x equals 2. And I have a place on my graph there. Let me make it a different color. There at 2, -1. And I have a place here at 2, +1. So when I put in 2, I get out 1. But also when I put in 2, I get out -1. So this automatically makes this no, this is not a function, because when I put in this one x value, I get out 2 different y values. All right, and this leads us to something called the vertical line test. All right, so the way to check something is a graph is you check all these vertical lines. All right, so I'm just going to think about like every vertical line I could draw through this graph. If that hits the graph just one time, right, all these hit the graph just one time, then it is a function. All right, however, if you can draw a vertical line that hits your graph more than once, like this one hits it twice, right, then it's not a graph. So really when you're doing graphs, you just kind of check all the vertical lines. If they only hit your graph once, it is a function. If you have any single vertical lines that hit your graph twice, then it's not a function. All right, so with that in mind, check to see if this is a function. And the answer is this one is yes, it is a function. So I choose some vertical lines. Technically, you had to check like every single possible vertical line, but again, you can use some intuition to see if I drew any vertical line, it's only going to hit that blue graph once. And as long as those vertical lines hit the graph once, then it is a function. If I had some extra piece coming up here and it started hitting the graph twice here and there, all right, then it would not be a function. But what we have is something that is only hitting the graph once, so we do have a function. All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about with functions is determining what the input and output is. All right, so when we're just looking at expressions and graphs and tables, then it's just going to be x and y. All right, but when dealing with real-world situations, we have to decide which is which. All right, so determine the input and output for types of donuts in their price. All right, so maybe we have chocolate. Actually, just let me write these down. All right, so we have these 3 donut flavors, and then maybe they have prices. All right, so these are the prices, and glazed, easier to make, so it's a little bit cheaper than the other one. So if this was a function, which one would have to be the input and which one would have to be the output? All right, so first let's start if price was the input. So if I put in price, if I put in 175, that would be related to chocolate, 150 be related to glaze, and 175 be related to strawberry. Right. Then I have to ask myself, would this actually be a function? Well, if I put in 150, I'll only get glazed. But if I put in a price of 175, there's two different donuts that could give me that price. All right, so it would not be a function if I made price input and type the output. All right, but if I do it the other way and make these my input and these my output, then it is going to be a function, because when I put in chocolate, there's only one price for a chocolate donut. When I put in glaze, there's only one price for a glazed donut. All right, so this is what you have to make sure when you're deciding what the input and output is. Make sure that when you put in one of your input, you can only get one of your output. All right, and like I said, with price, there's multiple donuts that have the same price, so that can't be the input, so I have to switch it around, make input the type of donut. All right, population by year. So again, let's put down some random facts. All right, so let's say these are the facts. We're talking about some town. In 1990, there's 10,000 people, 2000, 11,500, 2010, 12,000 people. All right, so you're asking yourself, what's the input and the output? Based on this limited amount of data, there's no repeats no matter which direction I go, but I have to think about, would it be possible for there to be a repeat? So if I put in a population and wanted to get out a year, is it possible that I put in one population and get out two different years? And yeah, it could be possible. I could have, in 2010, we know there was 12,000 people, but maybe next year nobody moved or anything. In 2011, there's also 12,000 people. So if I put in just the population 12,000, there's might be multiple years that we had that population, or maybe the population went up and back down and back up. So you have multiple times you get a single population. All right, so we don't want the population to be the input. And this is a general thing that normally when you have time is going to be your input, because I put in 1 year, there's only one population associated with that year. If I put in this year, there's only one possible population for that year. So my input is going to be the time, the year, and then my output is the population. So I'm just making sure there's no situation where I can put in one thing and get out multiple things. All right, so here's one to try on your own. Determine the input for students and grades. And we talked about this briefly at the start of the video, but if I put in one student name, I'm only going to get one grade associated with that student. All right, so if I put in my name, I'm only going to have my one grade in the class. So my input is student, my output is grade. If I try to do the other way, say I put in grades and try to get out the student, if I put in something like a 94, well, last unit, multiple people got a 94, so I'd get multiple students up here that have that grade, and that's not a function because I'm getting multiple things out. All right, so again, just double check which one is which by saying, is it possible for it to be a function if I make that my input? All right, and our videos aren't going to have the multiple choice questions anymore, just to kind of shorten the amount of time that you're watching the videos. You don't have to do an extra problem. I still have the chances to do the try it on your own one, so you'll still be able to determine along the way if you understand what is being covered, and then you'll know where to kind of go from when you're done watching the video. So do you want to go do practice problems? Do you want to go directly to me and get help? Do you want to go directly to the skill check? Again, it's up to you, judging from those try on your own problems if you understood the video and all that. All right, everyone's going to be in a little bit different place, but just make the video watching experience a little bit shorter. All right, we're going to get rid of those multiple choice questions.